of a refugee. So understanding that before you apply is really important. Australian government recently announced some changes to the broader migration framework in Australia to, I guess, provide more flexibility to Hong Kongers, and that's because there are many Hong Kongers here that are typically on either student visas, graduate skilled visas, which is the visa that you get typically after a student visa if you've completed a bachelor level or a certain course, and then there's also a number of Hong Kongers here on what's called temporary skilled shortage visas or employee sponsored visas. You might have heard of 457s or 482s, and so there's a large number of Hong Kongers on those types of visas. So the government's really honed in on those and tried to provide some greater flexibility for those visa holders to, I guess, provide some temporary relief to some of the concerns in returning to Hong Kong. And in the statement that has been made, there's been reference to permanent pathways, but they haven't yet been defined in any great detail. So what we're going to go through tonight is just some of the changes that have been made that we know about, and then flag some of the things to look out for moving forward.
So one of the main responses or the main visa pathways that the Australian government has implemented is for the Hong Kong students or Hong Kong passport holders. Mostly for many of the students that are currently studying at universities or doing tertiary education are able to apply for what we call a subclass 485 graduate skilled visa after they've completed their studies. That's provided they meet the other eligibility requirements for a 485 visa. Specifically for Hong Kong passport holders, the department has introduced a 5-year graduate skilled visa, meaning that they will, as long as they are a Hong Kong passport holder and able to provide evidence of that, once they apply after they've completed their studies for a 485 visa, they will be granted a 5-year graduate skilled visa. So usually in the 485 category, you'd be granted a 2-year visa or a 4-year visa possibly. However, for Hong Kongers, it will be a 5-year visa.
That's right. And the other thing just to note there is, I mean, if we had many hours, we could go through lots of different things. But one, I think, issue that is on everyone's mind is for students who are currently stuck outside of Australia that weren't able to get back to Australia before COVID and the travel restrictions were implemented. The government is working on some greater flexibility around completing online study to complete courses remotely and still be eligible for some of these visas. So I won't go through it tonight, but definitely keep an eye on the Department of Immigration's website, and there's a specific COVID section that talks about some of the changes that have been implemented and might be implemented soon to at least allow some greater flexibility there for people who have been stuck outside. So one thing that is unclear is in the statement, the department did make reference to permanent pathways while sort of after the 5-year period on the 485 visa, which is the graduate skilled visa. What's not clear is what subclass of visa that is and how that's going to operate, or whether it's expected that people will just have to simply use the current framework that we have and the visas that are available. So generally speaking, when you're not talking about protection visas, but talking about other types of visas, the most common permanent visas that people pursue are probably the independent skilled visas, which are the ones where you need to have a certain number of points for, and it's a competitive process. You go in a pool of people and put in expression of interest, and if you've got enough points and in a particular occupation, then you might get an invitation from the government to apply for an independent skilled visa. The other common way is through an employer. If you're working with an employer, or you have an employer that's willing to sponsor you, or nominate you rather, for a permanent visa, then that's another pathway that might be available. And it's important to understand that whilst you hold the 485 visa, or this 5-year graduate skilled visa, you can apply for permanent residency at any time through that period. You don't have to wait until the end of that 5-year period. In fact, you can't wait until the end, because you'll become unlawful, and you definitely can't let that happen. But applying within the 5-year period is perfectly fine. And if you're eligible for the permanent visa, then you simply make the application if and when you're eligible. It's also worth noting that there is some flexibility provided for people who are studying in a regional area. And there is also some advantages studying in a regional area. You are able to claim more points for that independent skilled visa. And there may be some permanent, again, we're not exactly sure what visa is going to be provided for in terms of permanent pathways. What's been announced suggests that there might be greater flexibility for Hong Kongers to meet the criteria for what's called a 491 visa, which is a regional regional skilled visa, but we're still unclear as exactly what the subclasses are going to be for the permanent visas at the end of all of this. And I think that highlights the problem, because when people come to us and ask us, do I apply for protection or do I apply for my 485 and wait and see what happens? It's a very difficult decision, because if you wait to apply for protection, there might be issues of delay, and the Department of Immigration might be concerned that if you, were feared returning in 2020, but you didn't lodge an application for protection until 2022, they might be concerned that you didn't really fear returning. Otherwise, you would have applied when you first became aware you might be at risk. And likewise, it's hard to know exactly what the permanent visas will be that are available sort of towards the 4-5 year mark from now. So again, there's a bit more work to do, I think, from the Australian government's perspective to really clarify exactly what pathways might be available to people, and then they can make educated decisions about their permanent pathways now.
Similarly of what James was saying, there is the option for Hong Kong passport holders that are currently holders of 485s and 482 visas, which is the employer-sponsored visas, to have an additional 5 years in addition to the time they've already spent in Australia. There are certain criteria to meet with the 485s and the 482 visas.
Sorry, Rabs, that should be 457, not 485.
Oh, all right.
My mistake.
Sorry, that's typo. 457 visa holders. So 457 was the previous 482. A lot of numbers in Australian immigration, but it's basically an employer-sponsored visa. So you have your employer who's sponsoring you for a particular occupation that's on a skilled list, and so the Hong Kong individuals or Hong Kong passport holders are eligible for a further 5 year, provided their occupation is on a skilled list and they meet the labour market testing requirements, which is also quite an intense procedure to go through, or process to go through with your employer, and also a number of other criteria. So I think when Hong Kong individuals or individuals from Hong Kong are assessing whether they should go down this route or not, it's really important to, again, get independent legal advice about whether they meet the criteria for these particular visa categories. Because whilst it's, the department have put forward a press release about 5 year visas, it does come with a lot of additional information that you would need, a lawyer to assist you with in terms of explaining all of that to you. So, our main aim is to educate, Hong Kongers, educate individuals or migrants to make sure that they're at least aware of what the requirements are, because it isn't as easy as you'll definitely get a visa for 5 years. You'll get a visa provided you meet other requirements. And then also bouncing off what James has said, whilst the department have said that there are going to be a pathway, or there is going to be a pathway to permanent residence, they've provided not too much transparency about what that actually may be. We have an idea of what, permanent residency pathways are in Australia. However, it's unclear, or we don't really know right now what the department has in mind in terms of, are they going to create a new category for Hong Kong passport holders, or are they going to adjust the current permanent residency ones, as they've done with temporary visas, to include, a permanent resident pathway for Hong Kong passport holders.
So just wrapping up those changes, there's changes that have been implemented for 482 and 457 holders to accommodate a further period of stay here in Australia for up to 5 years. The similar concept has been implemented for 485 temporary graduate skilled visa holders. And in October, the independent skilled visa program will open up again, hopefully, fingers crossed, which is the subclass 189 and 190 and 491, which I'm sure many people have got their eye on and familiar with. So we expect to know much more about those programs in October 2020 moving forward, once the Australian budget is released. So that's an exciting time. So there have been some changes that allow for people to stay here longer, but the point of permanency is still unclear, and that's where we really need to advocate around, and also consider what other permanent visa options are available. I would just throw in there that there are a couple of other visas that people may want to turn their mind to. One is the Global Talent program, which is both a independent and employer-sponsored program. It's designed to recruit high-end talent in particular occupations. So for people who might have an internationally recognised set of skills in specific areas, and could secure an income in Australia of above 153,900, which is a nice high income. But if you can demonstrate that you can earn above that in your specific field, it might be worth looking at the global talent stream. That's something to have a think about. And then the other one is for people who are high net wealth individuals. So you might have a history of investment, business innovation and investment in Hong Kong. There is a subclass of visa that's available for investors, which I think for some will be quite attractive. So it's worth turning your mind to those as well. As I said, we've been saying a lot of tonight, the changes are good. They don't go far enough. We need to know more. And again, it is really important to get advice about your own circumstances, so that you don't do something that might implicate your future visa options. So now we've got time for questions, and we have had some questions submitted to us. If you'd like us to run through them, or if you would like to ask us questions now from the group, we can do that as well.
Yep. Hey James, I'm Jack from the Hong Kong International Alliance, Brisbane. Thank you and Rebia for giving this such wonderful and informative presentation about visas. Just a quick question. If some Hong Kong students, they've graduated from their degree and they've applied for a graduate visa, so they would like to do a master's or like a further study after their graduate visa, would you recommend them to get a study visa or just keep using the graduate visa for the study? Like, given the 5 years could be used for study as well in Australia.
Yeah, that's a bit of a complicated one. Robbie, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, but if you've applied for so you can only ever hold one 485 visa in your life.
Yeah.
So if you've applied for the 485 and you've not received a decision as yet, and you think, well, look, I actually want to do a master's. I'm thinking of, I've done my bachelor's. I'm thinking of doing a master's, and I might be inclined to think about applying for a new student visa if you're eligible for it, and withdrawing the 485 and doing the 485 visa at the end of the master's, because you actually get a bit longer on the 485 at the end of a master's. And again, like you need the 485 is really designed to give graduates that ability to find employment and sort out their visa and give you that opportunity to get some practical work experience in your field. So you don't necessarily want to be doing that in between a bachelor's and a master's, because if you had the 485 and then you went on to a student visa after that to do a master's, you can't apply for another 485. You're then in a situation where you have to try and do some other type of visa, and it becomes a bit more complicated in that scenario. But yeah, would you agree with that, Rabia?
Yeah, I agree with that process, but also just very important to note the process in withdrawing and applying for the student visa. Make sure you get help around that, because most people probably would be granted a bridging visa that's inactive associated with the 485 application. And so it gets a bit complicated or a bit complex when you apply for the student visa and then withdraw the 485 visa in terms of the bridging visa associated with that, because you don't want to be withdrawing and then applying and then not really have any bridging visa to apply with or stay lawfully in Australia. So the process is definitely correct. It's just make sure you get assistance with doing that process.
Right, that sounds a bit complicated.
Yeah. I think the problem is if you're withdrawing something and then you find out later, well, actually, I'm not eligible for the student visa, or actually, I want to apply for my 485 again, that becomes really problematic. So I can see where you're coming from, where you're deciding whether you do your 485 now or later. And from a strategy point of view, you probably do it later. It's just a matter of working out the technical visa issues in the meantime to make that work.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, James. The next question is in relation to BNO passports. So I'm sure this one is a burning question for many people. So Hong Kong BNO passport and the Hong Kong SAR passport. And as the way I understand is that the new regulation applies to Hong Kong SAR passport only. So for example, this person holds a 485 visa using this BNO passport. So under the new regulation, he's wondering whether he'll be granted 5-year extension. And if the answer is no, is there any other suggestion that will allow him to take advantage of the new arrangements?
So that's the ones that have the British national passports, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And are these individuals, do they have Hong Kong passports as well or not?
They have Hong Kong passport and a BNO passport, but then the visa is based on their
BNO passport.
Yeah.
I think this is one we'd need to check. In the legislative instrument, which introduces the changes around the 485s, from memory, the wording is that the person must have held a Hong Kong passport at the time they were granted the visa. So I'm not sure a distinction is made to which passport the visa is linked to. It's more about whether or not at the time it was, granted, you had a Hong Kong passport. And I'm Might have to come back to you on that one just to be sure. I think it's a really good question.
I've actually got a friend who's encountered a similar experience, and he managed to change the passport number on his visa into the BNO passport, into the Hong Kong SAR passport he's holding from the BNO passport. So
you can certainly do what's called a notice of change of details to update your passport details with the department, and they'll change the primary passport in that way. I suspect that might have been what that person did.
Yeah, I think it works for him. Yeah. Would that be a possible solution to this?
Well, I think that changes the passport the department has on their system for their references currently, but the way the legislative instrument works about these changes is what passport did you hold at the time you applied for or were granted the visa. So it's probably a matter of looking back at that time and what what passports did you hold, and I'm not sure it's a matter of like which passport you used to apply for the visa, but more did you hold a valid Hong Kong passport at that time? And if you did, then I suspect you'll be able to access those changes, regardless of what passport your visa's linked to. But I would like to probably check that one.
Right. Okay. Thanks, James. Thank you.
Thanks, James. And we have a few questions specifically in relation to protection visa as well. So I think one of our members has a few questions.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you, James and Rabia. I'm conscious of time, so I might just ask two last questions and then wrap up with the seminar. So this one is in relation to 482 visas. So it's a question that we've been asked quite a lot. So under the 482 conditions, there are employer sponsor requirement. So the question is, are the applicants required to have the same employer for the whole 5 years, or are they allowed to switch employers?
Yeah, I think this one's where someone holds a 482 or a 457 is the older version. So with that visa, the business nominates someone, and there's a condition on that visa. Whilst you're nominated with the business, you must only work for that business or an associated entity of that business. Now, if you, for whatever reason, it might be you've been made redundant because of COVID, or you've got a better opportunity somewhere else, or whatever it is, if you want to move to a new employer, the process you go through, generally speaking, is what's called a nomination transfer, and that's where you transfer the nomination to the new business. It may not be, well, there may be no need to reapply for the visa, because the visa sometimes can be valid for, well, will be in this case for 5 years potentially. So you don't need to renew it unless you're coming up to your sort of renewal date. But yeah, you generally would do a nomination transfer. And the key thing is you can't start working for the new business until the nomination's been approved. So you don't want to breach that condition that you have. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, James. I think, yeah,